"Grandma, don't eat that," my grandson shouted at the family dinner. I asked, "Why?" "Please, just leave," he replied. I switched my plate with my daughter-in-law's mother. 15 minutes later, she simply fainted, revealing, "I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end, and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached. I'm Inez, and at 68 years old, I thought I knew my family. I thought the worst betrayal I'd face would be someone forgetting my birthday or missing Sunday dinner. I was wrong. Dead wrong. Literally. It was a Tuesday evening in October when I decided to host what I thought would be a pleasant family gathering. The autumn air had that crisp bite to it that made me want to cook something warm and comforting. I'd spent the entire afternoon preparing my famous pot roast, the same recipe I'd been making for 40 years. The house smelled like home. Garlic, rosemary, and that rich, deep aroma that only comes from slow-cooked beef. My son David arrived first with Alara, his wife of 3 years, and my precious grandson, Marty. At 12 years old, Marty was the light of my life, always full of energy and curiosity. But that evening, something was different about him. He seemed nervous, fidgety, keeping his eyes on his mother in a way that made my grandmother instincts prickle. Alara had been acting strange for weeks. I'd noticed it during our last few visits, the way she'd watch me when she thought I wasn't looking, how she'd steer conversations toward my health, my medications, my advancing age. So she was 34, beautiful in that sharp, calculated way some women perfect, with blonde hair that never seemed out of place and a smile that never quite reached her eyes. "Inez, you've outdone yourself again," she said, surveying the dining room table I'd set with my good china. "This looks absolutely wonderful." Her voice had that overly sweet quality that made my skin crawl, but I smiled back. "Thank you, dear. I know how much David loves pot roast." David hugged me, but even he seemed tense. My son had changed since marrying Alara. The easy laugh I remembered from his childhood had become forced, and he rarely visited alone anymore. Tonight his jaw was tight, and he avoided eye contact. "Where's your mother, Alara?" I asked, noticing we were one place setting short. "Oh, she'll be here any minute," Alara replied quickly. "She was just running a quick errand." I bustled around the kitchen, bringing out the side dishes, mashed potatoes, green beans, fresh rolls. Everything looked perfect. Everything felt wrong. Alara's mother, Margaret, arrived just as I was setting the pot roast on the table. She was a frail woman in her early 70s, with silver hair and kind eyes that reminded me of my own mother. She'd always been pleasant enough, though we didn't know each other well. "Margaret, how lovely to see you," I called out, genuinely pleased. "I've set you a place right here, next to Marty." As we all took our seats, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Alara kept glancing at the kitchen, then at me, then at David. Marty was practically vibrating in his chair, and Margaret seemed unusually quiet. "Inez," Alara said suddenly, her voice bright but strained. "I made sure to put your plate right there, with the extra vegetables. I know how much you love them." I looked down at my plate. It did look delicious. Thick slices of pot roast swimming in rich gravy, creamy mashed potatoes, perfectly seasoned green beans. But something about the way Alara emphasized it being my plate made me uncomfortable. "That's very thoughtful, dear," I said, picking up my fork. That's when Marty exploded. "Grandma, don't eat that." The words burst out of him like he'd been holding them back with every ounce of strength in his small body. Everyone froze. The fork stopped halfway to my mouth. "Marty," David's voice was sharp with warning, but my grandson wasn't backing down. His face was pale, his hands trembling as he stood up from his chair. "Please, Grandma, please just go away. Leave the table. Don't eat anything." The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear the old grandfather clock in the hallway ticking, the slight hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. Alara's face had gone completely white, and I saw something flicker in her eyes. Panic. "Honey, what's wrong?" I asked Marty gently, setting my fork down completely. Marty looked at his mother, then at his father, then back at me. Tears were starting to form in his eyes. "I can't. Please don't eat that." "Marty's been having some behavioral issues lately," Alara said quickly, her voice pitched higher than normal. "Haven't you, sweetheart? Maybe you should go to your room." But I'd raised children. I knew the difference between a tantrum and genuine terror, and my grandson was terrified. Something cold settled in my stomach. Without really knowing why, I stood up and looked at Margaret, who was sitting quietly with her own plate in front of her. "Margaret," I said, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. "Would you mind switching seats with me? I'd love to sit next to Marty." "Oh, that's not necessary," Alara started. "I don't mind at all," Margaret said kindly, already standing. The switch happened quickly. I took Margaret's seat, and she took mine. With it came our plates. I now had her serving, and she had what Alara had so carefully designated as mine. "There," I said, trying to lighten the mood. "Now I can keep an eye on this troublemaker." I ruffled Marty's hair, and he leaned into me like he was seeking protection. We ate in relative quiet after that, though the tension never fully lifted. Alara barely touched her food, David kept checking his watch, and Marty stayed pressed close to my side. Only Margaret seemed truly relaxed, chatting pleasantly about her garden as she enjoyed what should have been my dinner. 15 minutes later, Margaret's fork clattered to her plate. "Oh," she said softly, pressing a hand to her forehead. "I feel quite dizzy." I turned to look at her just as her eyes rolled back, and she collapsed sideways in her chair, unconscious. The chaos that followed happened in slow motion. David jumping up, Alara screaming, my own hands shaking as I called 911. But through it all, one thought kept echoing in my mind. That should have been me. As the paramedics worked on Margaret, loading her onto a stretcher, I caught Marty's eye. He was crying now. Great heaving sobs. But when our eyes met, I saw something there that chilled me to the bone. Relief. My 12-year-old grandson was relieved that his grandmother was being taken away in an ambulance instead of me, which meant he knew exactly what had been in that food. And if Marty knew, then someone had told him. Someone in this room had tried to kill me tonight. Standing in my doorway, watching the ambulance pull away with Margaret inside, I realized that my perfect family dinner had just revealed the most horrifying truth of my 68 years. Someone I loved wanted me dead. Margaret survived, but barely. The doctors at St. Mary's Hospital told us she'd been poisoned with antifreeze. Ethylene glycol, they called it. Sweet tasting, nearly odorless, and absolutely lethal if consumed in the right amount. She was in intensive care, and they weren't sure if there would be permanent kidney damage. I sat in that sterile waiting room, surrounded by my family, and felt like I was drowning. Everyone was playing their parts perfectly. David paced the halls, looking appropriately worried about his mother-in-law. Alara sat in the corner, dabbing at her eyes with tissues, the picture of a distraught daughter. But I wasn't fooled anymore. "How could this have happened?" Alara kept saying. "How could antifreeze get into the food? I don't understand. She was good. If I hadn't seen Marty's terror, if I hadn't witnessed the careful way she'd designated which plate was mine, I might have believed her too." Marty hadn't said a word since we'd arrived at the hospital. He sat next to me, small and quiet, occasionally glancing up at his mother with eyes that held far too much knowledge for a 12-year-old. After 3 hours, when the doctors assured us Margaret was stable, David suggested we all go home and get some rest. "There's nothing more we can do tonight," he said, and I noticed how quickly Alara agreed. "You're right," she said, standing immediately. "Marty needs his sleep for school tomorrow." But as we walked toward the parking lot, Marty tugged on my sleeve. "Grandma," he whispered, "can I stay with you tonight, please?" I saw the flash of anger cross Alara's face before she controlled it. "Sweetheart, you have school tomorrow," she said in that falsely sweet voice. "You need to sleep in your own bed." "I want to stay with Grandma," Marty insisted, his voice stronger now. "Marty," David started. "Let him stay," I said firmly. I could use the company after tonight's scare. The look Alara gave me could have frozen water. But she couldn't object without seeming unreasonable, so she forced a smile and agreed. Once we were alone in my house, the same house where just hours earlier someone had tried to murder me, Marty finally broke down. He collapsed onto my living room couch and sobbed like his heart was breaking. I held him, rocking him the way I had when he was little, until the worst of it passed. "Grandma," he whispered against my shoulder, "I'm so sorry. I should have told you sooner. I should have stopped her. Stopped who, honey? He pulled back and looked at me with eyes far too old for his face. Mom, she's been planning this for months. The words hit me like a physical blow. I'd known deep down, but hearing it confirmed by my own grandson was devastating. Tell me everything, I said quietly. What Marty told me over the next hour destroyed every remaining illusion I had about my family. He'd overheard phone conversations. Alara talking to someone about getting rid of the old bat and making it look natural. He'd seen her researching poisons on her computer when she thought he wasn't looking. He'd watched her practice putting something in food and stirring it until it dissolved completely. She told me if I ever said anything, she'd send me away, Marty said, his voice breaking. She said no one would believe me anyway because I'm just a kid. But when I saw her put that stuff in your plate tonight, how long has this been going on? Since the summer, he said. Maybe longer. She started asking me weird questions about you. Like, did you take any medications? Did you ever feel sick after eating here? Did you have chest pains or anything? I felt sick. My own daughter-in-law had been using my grandson to gather information about my health, probably to figure out how to make my death look natural. Marty, is your father involved? The boy's face crumpled. I don't know. Maybe. He's been acting really weird lately, and he's been asking about your will a lot. My will. Of course. I owned this house outright, had a decent savings account, and some investments that had done well over the years. Not a fortune by most standards, but enough to be worth killing for, apparently. There's something else, Grandma, Marty said, his voice barely audible. I think Mom tried to poison you before. Remember when you got really sick after that dinner party last month? And the time before that when you had to go to the emergency room? I remembered. Both times I'd attributed it to food poisoning or a stomach bug. Both times Alara had been the one insisting I eat certain dishes. She's been practicing, I whispered, the full horror of it hitting me. She's been testing doses. Marty nodded miserably. Tonight was supposed to be the real thing. I heard her on the phone yesterday. She told someone it would finally be over. I sat back in my chair, my mind reeling. My daughter-in-law hadn't just decided to kill me on a whim. This was a carefully planned, methodically executed attempt at murder. She'd been slowly poisoning me for months, probably trying to find the right amount that would kill me without being immediately obvious. And she'd been using my grandson as an unwitting accomplice, forcing him to carry this terrible secret. Marty, why didn't Margaret get as sick as I would have? Because you're smaller, he said simply, and because Mom probably put extra in your plate since she wanted to make sure this time. The calculation of it made my blood run cold. Alara had literally measured out my death, but there was something else bothering me. Honey, how did you know for sure that tonight was the night? Marty's face flushed red. I listened at their bedroom door last night. Mom and Dad were talking. She said the old lady would finally be gone by Wednesday, and they could start looking at retirement homes for me. Retirement homes? For you? Not for me to live in, Marty said quickly. To put me in. She said once you were gone and they inherited everything, they wouldn't need me around anymore, that I was too much work and knew too much. The room seemed to spin around me. Not only had Alara planned to murder me, but she'd also planned to abandon my grandson afterward, her own son. That's when I knew I had to stop her, Marty continued. I couldn't let her hurt you, and I couldn't let her send me away. You're the only one who really loves me, Grandma. I pulled him close again, my heart breaking for this brave little boy who'd been carrying such a terrible burden. But beneath the heartbreak, something else was growing, something cold and calculating. Alara thought she was smart. She thought she'd planned the perfect murder. She'd even planned to get rid of the only witness afterward. She had no idea who she was dealing with. I'd survived 68 years, raised 4 children, buried a husband, and built a comfortable life through sheer determination and careful planning. If Alara wanted to play games with my life and my grandson's future, she was about to learn that I was far from the helpless old woman she thought I was. But first, I needed proof. Real proof that would stand up in court and ensure that Marty would never have to go back to that house. Marty, I said quietly, how would you like to help Grandma with a little project? He looked up at me, hope flickering in his eyes for the first time that night. What kind of project? I smiled, and for the first time since this nightmare began, it was completely genuine. the kind that's going to save both of our lives. The next morning, I woke up with the kind of clarity that comes from having your back against the wall. Marty was still asleep on my couch, curled under the old quilt I'd made when David was his age. Looking at him, so small and vulnerable, strengthened my resolve. This child had risked everything to save my life. Now it was my turn to save his. I made coffee and sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd planned countless birthday parties, holiday dinners, and family gatherings. Today, I was planning something entirely different. When David called at 8:30, I was ready for him. "Mom, how are you holding up?" His voice sounded genuinely concerned, but I could hear something else underneath. Impatience, maybe even irritation. "Oh, you know me," I said, making my voice sound shakier than usual. "I'm just so shaken up by what happened to poor Margaret. I keep thinking it could have been any of us." "Yeah, it's really scary," he agreed. "Listen, Alara thinks maybe you shouldn't be cooking for a while. You know, until we figure out how this happened. Maybe we could bring you some meals, or you could eat out more." How thoughtful of Alara to be concerned about my cooking. I almost laughed at the audacity. "That's very sweet of her," I said. "But I think I'll be fine. I'm going to have the kitchen thoroughly cleaned, just to be safe." There was a pause. "Mom," Alara also thinks. "Well, maybe this is a good time to talk about your living situation. This house is so big for just you, and after last night." There it was. Less than 12 hours after trying to kill me, they were already moving on to phase 2 of their plan. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" "Just that maybe it's time to consider assisted living. Somewhere with meal service, you know? Where you don't have to worry about cooking or maintaining this big house." "I see." I kept my voice neutral. "Well, that's certainly something to think about. Is Marty still sleeping?" "Yeah. Alara says to let him rest. He can miss school today after the trauma of last night." How convenient. Keep Marty home where they could work on him. Probably convince him that what he saw wasn't what he thought he saw. "Actually, David, I was hoping Marty could stay with me for a few more days. I could really use the company, and I think he needs some time to process what happened." Another pause, longer this time. "I don't think that's a good idea, Mom. Marty needs routine, and Alara thinks—" "What Alara thinks isn't really relevant here," I said, letting a bit of steel creep into my voice. "Marty is my grandson, and after what we've been through, I think a few days with his grandmother would be good for him." "Mom." "David." I made my voice firm. "Unless there's some reason you don't want Marty staying with me?" The silence stretched out. I could practically hear him thinking, probably wondering if I suspected anything. "Of course not," he finally said. "It's just, Alara worries about you being alone with a child, at your age." At my age. As if 68 made me incompetent. As if I hadn't raised 4 children successfully. "I managed to raise you just fine," I said dryly. "I think I can handle one 12-year-old for a few days." After I hung up, I found Marty awake in the living room, looking lost and scared. "Hey, sweetheart," I said, sitting beside him. "How are you feeling?" "Scared," he admitted. "What if Mom finds out I told you? What if she tries to hurt you again?" I took his hands in mine. "Marty, I need you to listen to me very carefully. Your mother isn't going to hurt me again because we're not going to let her. But I need your help, and it might be scary sometimes." He straightened up, trying to look brave. "What do you need me to do?" Over the next hour, I explained my plan. It was risky, but it was the only way I could see to get the evidence we needed and keep us both safe. "First," I said, "we need to document everything. Every conversation, every suspicious behavior, everything you remember from the past few months." I pulled out a notebook and we spent the morning writing down dates, times, and details. Marty's memory was remarkably good. He remembered specific phone conversations, times when Alara had acted strangely, and instances when I'd gotten sick after eating at their house. "Second," I continued, "we need to make them think their plan is working." What do you mean?" "I'm going to start acting sick, confused, like I'm getting worse. They'll think the poison is having delayed effects and hopefully they'll get careless." Marty looked worried. "But what if they try to poison you again?" "They won't," I said with more confidence than I felt. "Not for a while. They'll want to see if the damage from last night is going to finish the job first. And besides, I'm not eating anything they give me anymore. That afternoon, when David and Alara came to pick up Marty, I put on quite a performance. "Oh, I'm so glad you're here," I said, letting my voice waver slightly. "I've been feeling so strange today. Dizzy, and I keep forgetting things." I saw Alara's eyes light up with interest, though she tried to hide it behind concern. "Oh, Inez, maybe you should see a doctor," she said, but I could hear the satisfaction in her voice. "Maybe," I agreed. Although at my age, these things happen, don't they? My memory isn't what it used to be. "Mom, are you sure you're okay?" David asked, and for a moment he sounded like my little boy again. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just a bit rattled from last night, I suppose." When they tried to take Marty, I played my trump card. "Actually," I said, gripping Marty's hand, "I was hoping he could stay one more night. I keep having these episodes of confusion, and I'm afraid I might fall or something. Having him here makes me feel safer." It was brilliant, if I did say so myself. They couldn't object to Marty staying to take care of his poor, deteriorating grandmother without looking heartless. And if they thought I was already showing signs of mental decline, they'd be less worried about me figuring out their plan. "Of course," Alara said quickly. "Marty should definitely stay and look after you." After they left, Marty looked at me with something approaching awe. "Grandma, you're really good at this." "Honey, when you've lived as long as I have, you learn a few things about people. Your mother thinks she's very clever, but she's also very predictable." That evening, Alara called to check on me. "How are you feeling, Inez?" she asked, her voice dripping with fake concern. "Oh, not very well," I said, adding a slight tremor to my voice. "I had another dizzy spell this afternoon, and my stomach has been quite upset. Marty had to help me to the bathroom." "That's terrible," she said, but I could hear the excitement she was trying to suppress. "Maybe you should consider going to the emergency room." No, I said quickly. "I hate hospitals. I'll be fine. These old bodies just take time to recover, "Of course," she agreed. "Well, try to get some rest. And Inez, maybe you should think about what David said this morning, about your living situation, if you're having episodes like this." "You might be right," I said with a heavy sigh. "This house is awfully big for someone in my condition." After I hung up, I turned to Marty, who'd been listening from the kitchen doorway. "Did you hear that?" I asked. He nodded. "She sounded happy that you're sick." "Exactly. Which means she's going to get sloppy. People get careless when they think they're winning." Over the next 2 days, I perfected my act. I forgot conversations, seemed confused about simple things, and complained of ongoing stomach problems and dizziness. Each time Alara called, I sounded a little worse, a little more helpless, and each time I could hear the satisfaction in her voice growing. On the third day, she made her mistake. "Inez," she said during her daily check-in call, "I've been doing some research about your symptoms. I think you might have had a small stroke. Sometimes they can be so mild you don't even realize it's happening." A stroke, of course. That would explain the confusion, the dizziness, everything. And if I'd had one small stroke, who would question it if I had a larger, fatal one? "Do you really think so?" I asked, making my voice sound frightened. "I do," she said, her concern sounding almost genuine. "I think you should see a doctor right away. In fact, David and I have been talking, and we think you should come stay with us for a while, just until you're feeling better. Stay with them, where they could control what I ate, who I talked to, and when I died." "That's very thoughtful," I said carefully. "But I don't want to be a burden." "You could never be a burden," she lied smoothly. "We want to take care of you. That's what family does." After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen, staring at the phone. They were moving faster than I'd expected. I'd bought us some time by making them think their first attempt was working, but now they wanted to finish the job. The problem was, I still didn't have enough evidence to prove anything. I had Marty's testimony, but he was just a child. I had my suspicions and some circumstantial evidence, but nothing that would convince a jury. I needed to catch them in the act, which meant I was going to have to let them try to kill me again. The thought should have terrified me. Instead, I felt a cold, calm determination settle over me. They'd made one crucial mistake in their planning. They'd underestimated their target. I wasn't some helpless old woman waiting to die. I was a mother protecting her grandchild, and there was nothing more dangerous than that. Alara wanted to play games with life and death? Fine, but this time, I was going to be the one writing the rules. I had 48 hours to prepare before David and Alara expected me to move into their house. 48 hours to set a trap that would expose them and protect Marty forever. The first thing I did was call my lawyer, Robert Chen. I'd known Robert for 15 years. He'd handled my husband's estate and had always been straight with me. "Robert, I need to change my will immediately," I said when he answered. "Inez, is everything all right? You sound tense." "I'll explain when I see you. Can you fit me in today?" An hour later, I sat in Robert's office with Marty beside me. Robert raised an eyebrow when I walked in with my grandson, but he didn't ask questions until we were settled. "What's this about, Inez?" I told him everything. The poisoning attempt, Marty's testimony, my suspicions about the previous times I'd gotten sick. Robert listened without interruption, his expression growing more concerned with each detail. "This is serious," he said when I finished. "Have you contacted the police? With what evidence? A 12-year-old's testimony and my suspicions? They'd think I was a paranoid old woman." Robert leaned back in his chair. "What do you want to do?" "I want to change my will. Everything goes to Marty, with you as trustee until he turns 25. David gets nothing, and I want you to hold on to the original. Don't tell anyone about the change. Inez, if you suspect they're trying to kill you for your inheritance, removing their motive might be the smartest thing to do." "No," I said firmly. "If I change the will and tell them, they'll just find another reason to get rid of me. They know too much now, and they've already shown they're willing to abandon Marty. I need them to try again." "You want them to try to kill you again?" Robert looked horrified. "I want them to try and fail. And I want it all documented so they can never hurt either of us again." Robert was quiet for a long moment. "What do you need from me?" "I need you to know the truth, in case something happens to me. And I need you to help me set up some insurance." We spent the next 2 hours planning. Robert would have investigators ready to move if something happened to me. He'd also prepare guardianship papers that would give me full custody of Marty if anything happened to David and Alara. "One more thing," I said as we prepared to leave. "I need you to write a letter. If something happens to me, I want Marty to know that none of this was his fault, and that I was proud of him for trying to protect me." Robert's voice was gentle when he spoke. "Inez, are you sure about this? There has to be another way." "There is no other way," I said. "They've already decided I have to die. The only question is whether I'm ready for them when they try." That evening, I put phase 2 of my plan into motion. I called my neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, who lived across the street. "Dorothy, I need a favor," I said. "A big one." Dorothy Patterson was 72, sharp as a tack, and had been watching the neighborhood like a hawk for the past 20 years. If anyone would help me catch killers, it was her. "What do you need, honey?" I explained the situation, and Dorothy's reaction was immediate and fierce. "That little blonde witch," she snarled. "I never liked her. Always too sweet, you know? And the way she looks at your house like she's already measuring it for new curtains." "Dorothy, I need you to watch my house when they come to get me tomorrow. If anything seems wrong, call the police immediately." "What do you mean, wrong?" "If they take me out of here on a stretcher, if I seem unconscious or drugged, if Marty looks scared or upset, anything that doesn't look right." "Inez, are you sure you want to go through with this? I don't have a choice. They're going to keep trying until they succeed, and then Marty will be left with them. I can't let that happen." The next morning, I prepared my house like a stage set. I placed a small digital recorder in my purse and another one in the kitchen, hidden behind the flour canister. I arranged for Marty to text Dorothy at specific times. If he missed a text, she'd know something was wrong. When David and Alara arrived to help me pack, I was ready. "Mom, you look terrible," David said. And for once, he seemed genuinely worried. I did look terrible. I'd spent 20 minutes that morning making myself appear sicker. Pale makeup, trembling hands, the works. "I've been having those dizzy spells all morning," I said weakly. "And I'm so confused about everything. I can't even remember what I need to pack." "Don't worry about it," Alara said quickly. "We'll take care of everything. You just sit down and rest." I watched as she moved through my house, touching my things with a familiarity that made my skin crawl. She was already acting like she owned the place. "Inez," she said, coming back into the living room. "I made you some tea. It'll help settle your stomach." She handed me a cup of my own tea, brewed in my own kitchen, and I knew without a doubt that it was poisoned. "That's so thoughtful," I said, accepting the cup with shaking hands. This was it, the moment of truth. I lifted the cup to my lips, letting the liquid touch my mouth but not swallowing. Then I pretended to sip it while actually letting most of it spill back into the cup. "This tastes different," I said, frowning at the cup. "Different how?" Alara asked, but I could see the tension in her shoulders. "Bitter," I said, "almost metallic." "That's probably just because you're not feeling well," she said quickly. "Everything tastes different when you're sick." I took another fake sip, then set the cup down on the side table. "I think I need to lie down for a minute," I said, standing up slowly and swaying slightly. "Mom, are you okay?" David jumped up to steady me. "Just dizzy," I murmured, leaning heavily on him. What happened next was like watching a play unfold exactly as I'd written it. I pretended to collapse on the couch, my breathing becoming shallow and irregular. Marty, who knew what was happening, started crying and calling my name. David began to panic, shouting for someone to call 911, but Alara was calm, too calm. "Don't call an ambulance yet," she said. "Let's see if she comes around on her own. Sometimes these episodes pass." "Are you crazy?" David shouted. "She's barely breathing." "David, calm down," Alara said firmly. "Getting hysterical won't help anyone." Through my barely opened eyes, I watched her check her watch. She was timing it, waiting to see how long it would take for whatever she'd given me to kill me. "Please, Mom, call 911, Marty begged, playing his part perfectly. "In a minute, sweetie," Alara said, her voice still eerily calm. "Let's just wait a little longer." That's when I knew I had her. Any normal person would have called for help immediately. Any innocent person wouldn't have suggested waiting when someone was dying in front of them. Alara's behavior was so clearly that of someone who expected me to die that even the most skeptical jury would see it. After what felt like an eternity but was probably only 3 minutes, I heard David say, "That's it, I'm calling 911. "No, wait," Alara said sharply. "I think she's already gone." Already gone. She wanted me to be dead. I waited until I heard the sirens before I regained consciousness. What happened?" I whispered weakly, opening my eyes and looking around in confusion. The relief on David's face was genuine. The disappointment on Alara's was equally real. "You collapsed, Mom," David said, holding my hand. "The paramedics are here." As the EMTs checked my vital signs and asked me questions, I gave them the performance of my life, confused, weak, unable to remember clearly what had happened. I mentioned the bitter taste of the tea, and I saw one of the paramedics make a note. "We should take her in for observation," the lead paramedic said. "At her age, a collapse like this could indicate several serious conditions." "Is that really necessary?" Alara asked. "She seems to be feeling better." The paramedic gave her a look that clearly said he thought she was an idiot. "Ma'am, your mother-in-law just lost consciousness for several minutes. That's not something we take lightly." As they loaded me onto the stretcher, I made sure to grab my purse with the recorder inside. I also made eye contact with Marty, giving him the slightest nod to let him know I was okay. At the hospital, I continued my act while the doctors ran tests. Everything came back normal, of course, because I hadn't actually consumed any poison. But the important thing was that it was all being documented. When the nurse asked me about what I'd eaten or drunk before the episode, I made sure to mention the tea that Alara had made for me. "It tasted strange," I said weakly. "Bitter, metallic. I've never tasted anything like it." The nurse made a note, and I knew that if anything happened to me in the future, there would be a record of this conversation. David and Alara visited that evening, with Marty in tow. "How are you feeling, Mom?" David asked. "Confused," I said honestly. "The doctors can't figure out what caused the episode. They're running more tests." "I'm sure it's nothing serious," Alara said, but I could see the frustration in her eyes. Her plan had failed again, and now there were medical records documenting my symptoms. "The doctor did ask me about the tea," I said casually, watching Alara's reaction. "He wanted to know exactly what was in it." Alara's face went pale. The tea? It was just regular tea. Earl Grey, I think. That's what I told him, I said. But he seemed very interested in the metallic taste I mentioned. He said they might want to test it. Test it? David looked confused. Test tea? When someone has an unexplained collapse, they have to consider all possibilities, I said, including the possibility that something they consumed might have caused it. The silence that followed was deafening. Alara's hands were shaking, and she kept glancing toward the door like she wanted to run. Well, she said finally, her voice pitched too high. I threw the cup away. I was just cleaning up while we waited for the ambulance. Of course she had. But what she didn't know was that I'd only pretended to drink the tea. The cup, with most of its poisoned contents still inside, was now sitting in my dishwasher at home, waiting to be tested. And Dorothy Patterson had watched her throw something into my garbage can when she thought no one was looking. As visiting hours ended and my family prepared to leave, I caught Marty's hand. I'll be home soon, sweetheart, I said softly. Promise? He whispered. I promise. And when I come home, everything is going to be different. Alara overheard and smiled that fake, sweet smile of hers. Of course it will be, she said. We're going to take such good care of you, Inez. You'll never have to worry about anything again. Looking into her eyes, I saw my own death reflected back at me. She wasn't giving up. If anything, she was more determined than ever, but that was exactly what I was counting on. Because tomorrow, when I was released from the hospital, I was going to give her one final chance to show her true colors, and this time, I'd make sure the whole world was watching. The hospital released me the next afternoon with instructions to follow up with my regular doctor and a prescription for mild anxiety medication that I had no intention of taking. As David wheeled me out to the car, I played my part perfectly. Fragile, confused, dependent. I still feel so strange, I said weakly as Alara helped me into the passenger seat. Like I'm not quite myself. That's completely normal after what you've been through, Alara said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. You just need rest and people to take care of you. The drive to their house felt like a funeral procession. I stared out the window at the familiar streets, wondering if I was seeing them for the last time. But every time doubt crept in, I thought about Marty sitting quietly in the back seat, and my resolve strengthened. Their house was a modern two-story in one of the newer developments, all clean lines and expensive finishes, but somehow cold. David carried my small suitcase upstairs, while Alara showed me to what she called my room. We've set up the guest room on the first floor so you won't have to worry about stairs, she said, opening the door to a room that felt more like a cell than a bedroom. One small window, furniture positioned so the bed couldn't be seen from the hallway, and most importantly, far from Marty's room upstairs. This is lovely, I said, settling into the chair by the window. So thoughtful of you. I want you to feel completely comfortable, Alara said. And safe. That's the most important thing. Safe. The irony wasn't lost on me. That first evening, they treated me like spun glass. David hovered anxiously, asking if I needed anything every few minutes. Marty stayed close, playing the concerned grandson while secretly checking on me with his eyes. And Alara. Alara watched me like a hawk studying its prey. Dinner was a carefully orchestrated performance. Alara had prepared what she called light, easy-to-digest foods. Soup, crackers, herbal tea. I ate sparingly, claiming my stomach was still upset from the hospital stay. You should try to eat more, Alara urged, ladling another spoonful of soup into my bowl. You need to keep your strength up. I know, dear, but everything tastes so strange lately, I said, stirring the soup around. Ever since that episode. I saw her jaw tighten slightly. My continued survival was clearly frustrating her. After dinner, as David helped me back to my room, I overheard Alara on the phone in the kitchen. No, she's not getting better, she was saying in a low voice. If anything, she's getting worse, more confused, weaker. I don't think it's going to be much longer. She was reporting to someone about my condition like I was a business transaction. That night, lying in the unfamiliar bed, I heard them talking in their room upstairs. The heating vents carried sound throughout the house, and their bedroom was directly above mine. How long is this going to take? David's voice was strained. Not much longer, Alara replied. She's already showing signs of organ damage. The confusion, the weakness. It's all progressing exactly as it should. I can't take much more of this. Every time I look at her, I feel sick. You feel sick? Alara's voice turned sharp. David, we've come too far to back out now. Do you want to spend the rest of your life working jobs you hate while she sits on a fortune she can't even appreciate anymore? No, but nothing. This is temporary. A few more days, maybe a week, and then we can move on with our lives. Real lives, with real money. What about Marty? There was a pause, and when Alara spoke again, her voice was colder than I'd ever heard it. Marty will adapt. Children are resilient. And once we have the inheritance settled, we can look into boarding schools, good ones, where he'll get a proper education and learn not to ask so many questions. Boarding school. They were planning to ship my grandson away as soon as I was dead, and they had their hands on my money. The next morning, Alara brought me breakfast in bed. Another thoughtful gesture that allowed her to control exactly what I consumed. I made your favorite, she said brightly, setting down a tray with scrambled eggs, toast, and orange juice. And I added some honey to the juice. You need the energy. The juice looked normal, but I wasn't taking any chances. I waited until she left, then carefully poured most of it into the plant by the window and refilled the glass with water from the bathroom tap. Around noon, when I was supposed to be napping, I heard Alara talking on the phone again. This time, I managed to get close enough to the door to hear more clearly. It has to be today, she was saying. David's getting cold feet, and the old bat is starting to ask too many questions about her medications. I think she suspects something. A pause. No, I can't wait any longer. Today, when she has her afternoon tea, I'll make it strong enough that there won't be any question about the outcome. My blood ran cold. This was it. Her final attempt. I spent the rest of the afternoon preparing. I texted Dorothy Patterson from my hidden phone, letting her know that today was the day. I made sure the recorder in my purse was working and positioned where it would pick up conversations. Most importantly, I prepared Marty for what was about to happen. When he came to check on me after school, I whispered quickly while Alara was busy in the kitchen. Today's the day, I said softly. Remember what we talked about. No matter what happens, no matter how bad it looks, don't try to stop her. Let it play out. His face went pale, but he nodded bravely. At 4 o'clock, right on schedule, Alara appeared with a cup of tea. I thought you might like some chamomile, she said, her voice warm and caring. It'll help you relax. The cup was beautiful bone china, one of her wedding set pieces. She'd even added a small plate of cookies, the perfect picture of a devoted daughter-in-law caring for her elderly mother-in-law. That's so sweet of you, I said, accepting the cup with trembling hands. I could smell it immediately, a chemical odor underneath the chamomile, sharper and more acrid than the antifreeze she'd used before. Whatever she'd put in this tea, it was meant to finish the job quickly. Drink up, she said, settling into the chair across from me. It's good for you. This was the moment I'd been preparing for. I lifted the cup to my lips, made sure she saw me take what looked like a large sip, then set it down with a satisfied sigh. Delicious, I said. You make the best tea. Alara smiled, but her eyes never left my face. She was watching for the first signs that the poison was taking effect. We sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes. I complimented her on the cookies, asked about her day, played the role of the unsuspecting victim perfectly, all while the poisoned tea sat cooling on the side table, most of its contents still undrunk. Inez, Alara said suddenly, there's something I've been wanting to talk to you about. Of course, dear. What is it? It's about your will. Here it was. She couldn't wait for me to die naturally. She needed to make sure everything was in order first. My will? I blinked in confusion, as if the topic had never occurred to me. David and I have been talking, and we think you should update it. To make sure everything is clear and legal. We wouldn't want there to be any complications for Marty. What kind of complications? Well, if something happens to you, which of course we all hope it won't for many years, but if it does, we want to make sure Marty is taken care of, that he has guardians who love him and a secure financial future. She was so smooth, so practiced. If I hadn't known what she was really saying, I might have been touched by her concern. I suppose that makes sense, I said slowly. What did you have in mind? Nothing major, she said quickly. Just updating the beneficiaries to reflect the current family situation. making sure David and I are listed as Marty's guardians, and that the inheritance is structured in a way that makes sense. Structured how? Well, you know how these legal things work, trusts and whatnot. David and I could manage everything for Marty until he's older. Much older, like never. I should probably talk to my lawyer about this, I said. Oh, that's not necessary, Alara said quickly. David knows a lawyer who specializes in estate planning, someone much more current than that old man you've been using. Of course they did. Someone who would make sure the will was written exactly as they wanted it. I don't know, I said hesitantly. Robert has been handling my affairs for years. I trust him. Inez, Alara's voice took on a harder edge. I think you're not understanding how serious this situation is. You've been having episodes, memory problems, confusion. What if something happens to you and your affairs aren't in order? What if Marty ends up in foster care because there are legal complications? She was threatening me, threatening to let my grandson end up in the system if I didn't sign over my estate to them. I wouldn't want that, I said weakly. Of course you wouldn't. That's why we need to take care of this right away. Today, if possible. Today. She wanted me to sign a new will today, and then die tonight from the poison tea. Quick, efficient, and legally bulletproof. I'm feeling a bit tired, I said, putting a hand to my forehead. Could we talk about this tomorrow? Inez. Alara stood up abruptly, her patience finally cracking. There might not be a tomorrow. The words hung in the air between us like a confession. What do you mean? I asked, my voice small and frightened. She caught herself, forcing her expression back into one of concern. I just mean that, at your age, with your recent health problems, it's important not to put off important decisions. But it was too late. I'd heard the truth in her voice, seen the mask slip for just a moment. Alara, I said quietly, is there something you're not telling me? She sat back down, leaning forward with an expression of deep sympathy. Inez, the doctors at the hospital, they told David and me that your episodes are likely to get worse. Much worse. They think you might have had a series of small strokes, and that larger ones are almost inevitable. They told you this. Why didn't they tell me? They thought it would be too upsetting for you in your current state. But David and I felt you had a right to know, so you could make informed decisions about your future. It was a masterful lie. She was creating a medical emergency that didn't exist to pressure me into signing away my estate, and she was using my supposed mental incompetence to explain why I wouldn't remember conversations that had never happened. How long do I have? I whispered. They don't know for sure, she said gently. But they think you should put your affairs in order as soon as possible. I sat back in my chair, letting the full weight of her deception wash over me. She wasn't just trying to kill me for my money. She was torturing me first, making me believe I was dying naturally so I'd cooperate in my own destruction. I need to think about this, I said finally. Of course, Alara said, standing up again. But don't think too long, for Marty's sake. After she left, I sat staring at the teacup on the table. In it, I could see the reflection of everything I'd lost. My son's love, my sense of family, my trust in the people closest to me. But I could also see something else. My own strength, still intact after 68 years of life's challenges. Alara thought she'd broken me down, made me helpless and dependent. She thought I was just a confused old woman who would sign whatever papers she put in front of me. She was about to learn how wrong she was, because tomorrow morning, I was going to give her exactly what she wanted, a confrontation that would expose her for what she really was. And this time, I was going to make sure there were witnesses. I woke up the next morning to the sound of Alara moving around the kitchen, probably wondering why I wasn't dead yet. The poisoned tea sat on my nightstand exactly where I'd left it, a testament to her failed plan. Today was the day I stopped running and started fighting back. At 8 o'clock sharp, there was a knock at the front door. Alara answered it, and I heard her surprised voice greeting someone. Mr. Chen? What are you doing here? I'm here to see my client. Robert's voice was firm and professional. Mrs. Holloway called me yesterday and asked me to come by this morning. Of course, I'd done no such thing, but Robert was playing his part perfectly. We'd arranged this as part of our contingency plan. She's not feeling well, Alara said, and I could hear the tension in her voice. "Perhaps you could come back another time." "I'm afraid this can't wait," Robert replied. "It's regarding her will." The magic words. I heard quick footsteps, and then Alara was in my room, her face flushed with excitement and anxiety. "Inez, your lawyer is here," she said. "He says you called him about your will?" "Did I?" I blinked in confusion. "I don't remember calling anyone. It's all right," she said quickly. "You've been having some memory issues. But since he's here, maybe we should take care of that business we discussed yesterday." "Perfect." She was so eager to get her hands on my estate that she was walking right into my trap. "I suppose that would be all right," I said weakly. "Could you help me to the living room?" As we made our way slowly down the hall, I saw Robert in the living room, but he wasn't alone. Detective Sarah Martinez from the local police department sat beside him, dressed in plain clothes, but with an unmistakable air of authority. "Who's this?" Alara asked sharply. "Detective Martinez," Robert said smoothly. "She specializes in elder fraud cases. Given Mrs. Holloway's recent health issues and the sensitive nature of estate planning, I thought it would be prudent to have a witness present." Alara's face went pale, but she couldn't object without looking suspicious. "Of course," she said tightly. "We want everything to be completely legal." As I settled into my chair, Detective Martinez smiled warmly at me. "Mrs. Holloway, I understand you've been having some health concerns lately?" "Yes," I said, glancing nervously at Alara. "I've been having episodes. Confusion, memory problems. My daughter-in-law thinks I might have had some small strokes." "I'm sorry to hear that," the detective said. "Have you seen a neurologist about these symptoms?" "The doctors at the hospital ran some tests," I replied. "But Alara says they told her things they didn't tell me." Detective Martinez raised an eyebrow and looked at Alara. "Is that right, Mrs. Holloway?" "They didn't want to upset her," Alara said quickly, "given her fragile state." "I see. And you felt it was appropriate to share medical information that doctors had decided to withhold from their patient?" The question hung in the air like a sword. Alara opened her mouth, then closed it again. I thought she had a right to know." "Of course," Detective Martinez said smoothly. "Now, Mr. Chen tells me there's some urgency about updating Mrs. Holloway's will?" "Yes," Alara said, gaining confidence again. "We want to make sure everything is in order, especially with her health being so uncertain." "That's very thoughtful of you," the detective said. "And what changes did you have in mind?" This was the moment I'd been waiting for. I watched as Alara launched into her carefully prepared speech about guardianship for Marty, trust funds, and the importance of having younger people manage the estate. She was so focused on selling her story that she didn't notice Detective Martinez taking notes, or the small recording device sitting openly on the coffee table. "So you believe Mrs. Holloway is mentally incompetent to manage her own affairs?" Detective Martinez asked when Alara finished. "Not incompetent," Alara backtracked quickly. "Just confused sometimes, forgetful. But competent enough to make major changes to her will?" "Well, yes, with guidance." "Whose guidance? Yours?" Alara was starting to look trapped. "David and I just want what's best for the family." "Of course you do," Detective Martinez said. "Mrs. Holloway, do you remember asking your daughter-in-law to make you tea yesterday afternoon?" My heart raced, but I kept my expression confused. "Tea? Yes, I think so. Chamomile tea." "And how did it taste?" "Strange," I said slowly. "Bitter." I didn't finish it. Detective Martinez nodded and looked at Alara. "Mrs. Holloway, I understand you threw away the teacup after your mother-in-law's episode?" "I was just cleaning up," Alara said, but her voice was starting to crack. "Fortunately, your neighbor Mrs. Patterson noticed you putting something in the garbage. She was concerned about Mrs. Holloway and decided to preserve the evidence." The color drained from Alara's face completely. "Evidence," she whispered. "The teacup and its remaining contents have been tested," Detective Martinez said calmly. "We found traces of strychnine, Mrs. Holloway. That's a very serious poison." The silence that followed was deafening. I watched as Alara's world collapsed around her, her carefully constructed plans crumbling like a house of cards. "That's impossible," she stammered. "There must be some mistake." "There's no mistake," Detective Martinez said, standing up. We've also tested the dishwater from Mrs. Holloway's house after the first incident. Same poison, different concentration. It appears you've been attempting to murder your mother-in-law for several months. No! Alara jumped to her feet. This is ridiculous. I would never— We also have testimony from a witness, the detective continued relentlessly. Someone who overheard you discussing your plans. Alara spun around to look at me, her face twisted with rage and desperation. You, she hissed. You knew. You've been playing games with me. For the first time since this nightmare began, I dropped my act completely. I sat up straight, looked her directly in the eye, and smiled. Yes, I knew, I said clearly. I've known since the night you tried to poison me the first time. The night my grandson saved my life by warning me. Marty, she breathed, understanding flooding her face. That little traitor, that brave little boy, I corrected her. He's been carrying the weight of your evil for months, terrified that you'd kill me and then abandon him. He's 12 years old, Alara, 12, and you made him an accessory to attempted murder. I gave him everything, she screamed, her composure finally shattering completely. I gave him a home, food, clothes, everything he needed. You gave him nightmares, I said, my voice hard as steel. You gave him the impossible choice between saving my life and staying loyal to his mother. You used him as a spy, gathering information about my health so you could plan my murder more effectively. Detective Martinez stepped forward. Alara Holloway, you're under arrest for attempted murder. Harsh, as the handcuffs clicked around Alara's wrists. She turned to me one last time, her beautiful face ugly with hatred. You think you've won? She snarled. David will never forgive you. Marty will never get over what you've done to his mother. You'll die alone, you bitter old woman. I looked at her calmly. Alara, I've been alone for 3 years, ever since you married my son and started poisoning him against me. The difference is, now I'm alone by choice, not because someone is trying to kill me. As they led her away, David came running down the stairs. He'd been upstairs the whole time, probably hiding from what he knew was about to happen. Mom, what's going on? He asked, though the guilt written all over his face told me he knew exactly what was going on. Your wife has been arrested for trying to murder me, I said simply. That's impossible, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. David, Detective Martinez said, we're going to need to talk to you as well. We have evidence suggesting you were aware of your wife's plans. I watched my son's face crumble as he realized there was no way out. He'd made his choice when he decided my money was worth more than my life, and now he was going to face the consequences. Mom, he whispered, I never wanted this to happen. Yes, you did, I said sadly. Maybe not at first, but somewhere along the way, you decided I was worth more dead than alive. You let her turn you into someone I don't recognize. I'm still your son. No, I said firmly. My son would have protected me. My son would have called the police the moment he suspected his wife was trying to harm me. You're not my son anymore, David. You're just a stranger who happens to share my DNA. The next few hours were a blur of police statements, evidence collection, and legal procedures. But through it all, one thing remained constant. Marty stayed by my side, holding my hand, finally free to love his grandmother without fear. When the dust settled, when the police had finished taking photographs of the poisoned teacup and collecting evidence from David and Alara's house, when the reporters had been sent away and the neighbors had stopped staring, it was just me and Marty in my living room. Grandma, he said quietly. Are you really okay? I'm better than okay, sweetheart, I said, pulling him close. I'm free. What's going to happen to me now? I held him tighter. You're going to live with me. I've already talked to the lawyers about getting legal guardianship. You're going to go to school, play with your friends, and never have to worry about grown-ups who hurt people ever again. What about Mom and Dad? I was quiet for a moment, choosing my words carefully. Your parents made some very bad choices, Marty. They're going to have to face the consequences of those choices. But that's not your fault, and it's not your responsibility to fix it. Do you think they ever really loved me? The question broke my heart. I think they loved the idea of you, I said honestly. But real love doesn't threaten to send someone away when they become inconvenient. Real love doesn't ask a child to keep dangerous secrets. How do you know the difference? I smiled and kissed the top of his head. Real love protects you, even when it's hard, even when it means making sacrifices, even when it means standing up to people who should love you but don't. 6 months later, I sat in the same living room, watching Marty do his homework at the coffee table where Detective Martinez had placed her recording device. The house felt different now, lighter, safer, filled with the kind of laughter that comes from genuine happiness rather than polite pretense. Ilara had been sentenced to 15 years for attempted murder. David got 5 years for conspiracy, though I suspected he'd be out in 3 with good behavior. They'd both tried to contact Marty through letters, but I'd made the decision to intercept them until he was old enough to decide for himself whether he wanted a relationship with them. The inheritance they'd been so desperate to get their hands on? I'd restructured it completely. The house would go to Marty when he turned 25, along with enough money to ensure he'd never have to depend on anyone else's goodwill for survival. The rest would go to charities that supported children in foster care, kids who, like Marty, had been failed by the adults who were supposed to protect them. But the real victory wasn't financial. It was the sound of my grandson laughing at something on television, the way he ran to hug me when he came home from school, the fact that he slept peacefully at night without nightmares about his grandmother being murdered. I was 78 years old now, and for the first time in years I felt truly alive. I'd learned that family isn't about blood or obligation or guilt. It's about the people who would risk everything to protect you, even when they're just 12 years old and scared. I'd also learned that I was stronger than I'd ever imagined. Strong enough to outwit people who thought my age made me helpless. Strong enough to risk my own life to save my grandson's future. Strong enough to walk away from toxic relationships, even when they wore the mask of family. As I watched Marty working on his math homework, his tongue poking out in concentration the same way his father's used to when he was that age, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Complete peace. The people who should have loved me had tried to destroy me, but in the end, they'd only made me realize how strong I really was. And sometimes, that's the greatest gift of all. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below, and meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.